Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The lunar dust kicked up in perfect parabolas under the low gravity, each particle following its predetermined arc, before settling into patterns that would remain undisturbed for geological ages. Commander Victoria Hayes watched through her reinforced visor as the excavation drill carved deeper into the regolith beneath Shackleton crater, its diamond-tipped bit screaming against primordial rock that had never known the touch of wind or rain. 23 days into what NASA's mission planners had classified as a routine geological survey. 23 days of core samples, mineral analysis, and the slow accumulation of data that would add footnotes to textbooks rather than rewrite them entirely. Hayes adjusted her suit's thermal regulation system and checked the depth readings displayed on her wrist-mounted computer for what felt like the 1000th time that morning. The numbers glowed steady and unremarkable, 47 meters down through layers of impact breccia and ancient mare basalt. The drill continued its methodical descent, each meter revealing nothing more exciting than trace amounts of water ice and the occasional meteoritic inclusion that dated back to the solar system's violent birth. Hayes had commanded 3 previous lunar missions, each one a masterpiece of precision and protocol that had advanced humanity's understanding of its celestial neighbour by incremental degrees. She'd grown accustomed to the steady rhythm of discovery through patience, the way lunar science revealed its secrets one careful measurement at a time. But something about this mission felt different, though she couldn't articulate why. Perhaps it was the dreams. For the past week, she'd been experiencing the most vivid dreams of her career. Not the usual anxiety dreams about equipment failure, or the recurring nightmare about her daughter Lily growing up without her. These were different. In these dreams, she stood in vast chambers filled with blue light, listening to voices that spoke in languages she'd never heard, but somehow understood. She'd mentioned them to Dr. Phillips during their weekly psychological evaluation, and he'd attributed them to the stress of extended isolation and the approaching end of their mission window. But the dreams felt too real, too specific. In them, she always found herself reaching towards something that pulsed with its own inner light, something that wanted to be found. Victoria. Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice carried an undertone that Hayes had never heard before, a mixture of excitement and something approaching fear. The xenogeologist was hunched over her tablet, her stylus dancing across readouts that painted disturbing pictures of the lunar subsurface. The density measurements aren't correlating with expected geological models. Hayes moved to peer over Vasquez's shoulder, her boots crunching softly on the lunar regolith. Eleanor had been her first choice for this mission, brilliant, methodical, and possessed of the kind of intuitive understanding of planetary geology that couldn't be taught. If Elena was concerned, then there was reason for concern. The data streams across the tablet told a story that violated everything they understood about lunar formation. Their ground-penetrating radar showed solid basalt extending down 40 meters, consistent with impact crater geology. But beneath that layer, the readings showed something troubling. Not another rock stratum, not loose regolith, not even the empty space that might indicate a lava tube. The radar was painting a picture of nothing at all, as if reality itself had been scooped away and replaced with absence. Equipment malfunction, Hayes suggested, though she knew Eleanor was too thorough for such an elementary error. Every piece of equipment on this mission had been tested, retested, and tested again. NASA didn't send malfunctioning gear 40,000 kilometers from the nearest repair shop. "I've run full diagnostics 3 times, Vasquez replied, her voice tight with the controlled excitement of a scientist confronting the genuinely unexplained. "Magnetometer, seismic array, radar, everything's functioning within normal parameters. The readings are consistent across all platforms." She paused, touching her stylus to the screen to highlight a particularly anomalous data set. "Victoria, there's a void down there, a big one, and it's not natural." From his position at the seismic monitoring station, Dr. Alexander Webb called out without looking up from his display screens. "Elena's right. I'm detecting resonance patterns consistent with a chamber at least 60 meters in diameter, possibly much larger. The acoustic shadows suggest the far walls are beyond our equipment's resolution range." Webb was their mission's astrophysicist, a man who spoke in peer-reviewed certainties and had never, in Hayes' experience, used words like possibly or suggest when describing his data. If Alex Webb was expressing uncertainty, then they were confronting something that pushed the boundaries of his considerable expertise. "Natural caverns don't exist on the moon," Hayes said, more to herself than to her team. She'd studied every aspect of lunar geology during her preparation for this mission. No volcanic activity in billions of years. No water erosion, no tectonic forces that might create underground chambers. The moon was geologically dead, its few mysteries locked away in impact craters and ancient lava flows. Engineer Carlos Rodriguez looked up from the drill assembly, his weathered face marked by 3 decades of NASA missions and the kind of practical engineering knowledge that kept astronauts alive in environments that offered no second chances. "Commander, I've been monitoring the torque readings for the past 20 minutes. The resistance patterns are all wrong. For the last 5 minutes, it's been like drilling through crystallized foam, almost no resistance at all." Rodriguez was a man who understood machinery, with an intimacy that bordered on the mystical. If he said the readings were wrong, then something fundamental about their understanding of the situation needed revision. The drill assembly chose that moment to validate his concern, breaking through the final barrier with a sudden lack of resistance that sent Rodriguez stumbling backward. The machine's high-pitched whine dropped to a low idle as the bit spun freely in empty space, no longer biting into solid rock. "Contact," Rodriguez announced, steadying himself against the excavation framework. "We've reached the chamber." Hayes felt her pulse quicken as she activated her comm system to mission control. The communication delay to Earth was a constant reminder of how far they were from help, how dependent they were on their own judgment and expertise. "Houston, this is Artemis Base 7. We have confirmed a large subsurface void beneath Shackleton crater, requesting permission to investigate." The 18-second delay stretched like hours before Houston's response crackled through the static. "Artemis Base 7, this is Houston. Hold your current position and await further instructions. Do not enter the chamber until we've completed analysis of your telemetry." But Webb was already deploying their fiber optic camera system, his scientific curiosity overriding protocol the way it always did when confronted with the genuinely inexplicable. Hayes watched him work, remembering the countless times she'd seen that same expression on his face, the look of a man who'd glimpsed something beyond the boundaries of accepted knowledge and couldn't resist the pull of discovery. The camera feed appeared on their shared display system, transmitted from the probe as it descended through 47 meters of carefully carved shaft into the void below. What they saw on their screens made rational conversation impossible. The chamber was vast beyond their instrument's ability to fully map. Its walls curved and smooth in a way that suggested deliberate construction, rather than natural formation. The surfaces met at angles that seemed mathematically precise, creating a space that felt purposeful, intentional. Emergency lighting from the probe cast shifting shadows that revealed the chamber's true mystery. Standing alone in the center of the cavern was a structure that redefined everything they thought they knew about the moon's history. A circular archway 3 meters high and perfectly symmetrical rose from the chamber floor like a monument to an unknown civilization. The structure appeared to be crafted from metal, but it was metal unlike anything in Earth's periodic table. Material that shifted between colors as the camera moved, cycling from silver to deep blue to something that seemed to absorb light entirely, as if the substance existed in more dimensions than human perception could access. "Dear God," Vasquez whispered, her voice barely audible through the comm system. "What is that thing?" Hayes stared at the bewildering structure, her mind cycling through explanations that crumbled under scrutiny. Ancient impact debris fused by unimaginable pressures. The angles were too perfect, the preservation too complete. Classified military installation. Not at this depth, not with technology that appeared to violate known physics. The only remaining explanation was one that her scientific training recoiled from considering. "Houston, are you receiving our video transmission?" Hayes asked, though she knew they were. Mission Control monitored every pixel of data from their missions, analyzing it with supercomputers and teams of specialists who had decades of experience interpreting the unexpected. The response came faster than usual, suggesting that someone at Mission Control had been waiting for this exact communication. "Artemis Base, we have your visual feed under analysis. Continue observation from your current position. Under no circumstances approach the structure." But Hayes was already moving toward the rappelling equipment, her hands working with the automatic precision of someone who performed these actions hundreds of times in training. The cautious part of her mind, the part shaped by 2 decades of NASA safety protocols, screamed warnings about contamination, unknown hazards, and the career-ending consequences of disobeying direct orders from Mission Control. The larger part, the part that had dreamed of moments like this since childhood, was already planning the descent. "Victoria, hold on," Webb said, but there was no real conviction in his voice. She could see the same hunger for answers burning in his eyes, the same need to understand that had driven him through 3 degrees in theoretical physics, and 15 years of staring at the stars through increasingly powerful telescopes. "This is why we're here," Hayes replied, checking her harness and rope systems with movements made automatic by countless hours of training, to explore, to discover, to push the boundaries of human knowledge beyond the comfortable limits of what we think we understand. She looked at her team, 3 of the finest scientific minds NASA had to offer, their faces illuminated by the otherworldly blue glow emanating from the chamber below. "We may never get another opportunity like this." The rappel into the chamber felt like descending through layers of time itself, their helmet lights carved through darkness that seemed older than memory, revealing walls that curved with mathematical precision that spoke of intelligence, planning, and purpose. But it was the archway that drew them, with the inexorable pull of gravity itself. Up close, the structure was even more disturbing to human sensibilities. The metal surface radiated warmth that Hayes could feel, even through her environmental suit's advanced insulation systems. When she removed her glove and pressed her bare palm against the material, the entire archway pulsed with rhythmic light that synchronized perfectly with her heartbeat, as if the structure was somehow aware of her presence and responding to her biological rhythms. "Temperature readings are physically puzzling," Rodriguez muttered, sweeping his scanner across the archway's surface. "Ambient temperature down here is minus 170 Celsius, but this structure is maintaining a consistent 15 degrees, and there's no detectable power source, no energy signature that might explain the heat generation." Webb approached from the opposite side, his spectrometer painting laser dots across the surface in patterns designed to reveal the material's atomic composition. "The metallurgy doesn't correlate with any known elements or alloys. It's not simply reflecting our illumination, it's converting photons into that blue luminescence through some kind of energy cascade process I've never encountered in any literature. Webb, Hayes said quietly, recognizing the expression on his face. What aren't you telling us? The astrophysicist paused in his analysis, and when he looked up, his face was pale with implications he didn't want to voice aloud. It's generating a magnetic field that fluctuates in complex patterns. Not random fluctuations, structured patterns that follow mathematical progressions. What kind of progressions? The kind that suggest intelligence. Someone or something embedded equations directly into the atomic structure of this material. Equations that describe space-time geometry in ways our current physics can't fully interpret. Before anyone could respond to this revelation, Houston's voice cut through their private moment of wonder. Artemis Base, we need you to deploy, probe through the structure, maintain safe distance during deployment, and be prepared for immediate evacuation if we detect any hazardous conditions. Hayes detected something in Mission Control's tone, an urgency that suggested they possessed information about the situation that hadn't been shared with the field team. She unpacked their most sophisticated exploration probe, a device equipped with cameras, sensors, communication systems, and emergency protocols that represented the cutting edge of robotic exploration technology. As the probe approached the archway, the metal surface began to shimmer like water disturbed by wind. The boundary between solid and permeable became fluid, and the probe passed through what had appeared to be solid metal as if it were merely an optical illusion. The video feed that returned challenged every assumption they held about the nature of reality. Beyond the archway stretched not another chamber or empty space, but a vista that belonged in no universe they understood. The interior of something vast and artificial extended into darkness that their probe's lights couldn't fully penetrate. Massive hull plating, scarred by impacts and twisted by forces that had deformed advanced alloys like clay, told the story of violence and catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Debris drifted in perfect silence through the zero-gravity environment, fragments of technology that appeared both familiar and incredibly advanced, pieces of structural elements that followed design principles beyond their comprehension, and other things that looked disturbingly organic despite their apparent artificial origins. "Mother of God," Webb breathed, his voice filled with the awe of a scientist confronting something that redefined the possible. "That's a spacecraft." The probe's cameras continued their survey, revealing the true scope of what lay beyond the portal. They were observing a derelict vessel that dwarfed anything humanity had ever conceived of building. The ship was easily a kilometer in length, possibly much larger. The probe's lights couldn't reach the vessel's extremities. Sections of the hull had been torn away like tissue paper, revealing interior spaces that seemed to extend beyond the horizon. Hayes' comm system crackled with an urgent transmission from Mission Control. "Artemis Base, you are now classified as a Class 1 xenoarchaeological site. You have authorization for direct investigation of the anomaly. Exercise extreme caution and be prepared for immediate evacuation on our command." Xenoarchaeological. The word struck Hayes like lightning. Houston believed they were looking at evidence of non-human intelligence. The three astronauts prepared for what might be humanity's first contact with alien technology. They equipped themselves with additional life support systems, emergency medical supplies, radiation detection equipment, and Hayes noticed with a mixture of anticipation and dread weapons. Someone at Mission Control was preparing them for the possibility that their first contact might not be peaceful. "Remember our protocols," Hayes addressed her team as they prepared to cross the threshold into the unknown. "We document everything we encounter. We follow standard xenobiological precautions. We maintain constant communication with each other and with Mission Control. And if any of us detect something that poses a threat to the team or to Earth's security, we abort the mission immediately." Webb nodded, but she could see the excitement burning in his eyes like fever. This was what every scientist dreamed of. The opportunity to be first, to see what no human had ever seen, to expand the boundaries of knowledge in ways that would redefine civilization itself. Vasquez checked her sidearm's power cell twice, her geologist's training warring with the possibility that her expertise might be less relevant than her ability to defend her teammates against unknown threats. Rodriguez crossed himself, an old habit from his childhood in Mexico that decades of NASA's secular training had never quite erased. "Dios nos proteja," he whispered. Stepping through the portal was like passing through liquid starlight. Pressure built against every surface of Hayes' environmental suit, as if she were diving through layers of increasingly dense medium before suddenly releasing and leaving her with the disorienting sensation of movement without direction. The transition lasted only moments, but it felt like crossing between different universes. Then they emerged into the corridors of the derelict vessel, and Hayes' first thought was that this was no alien ship. The proportions were unmistakably human. Door frames, corridor widths, the height of what appeared to be control interfaces. Everything was designed for human use. But the technology was centuries beyond anything Earth's most advanced laboratories had achieved. The walls hummed with residual energy that spoke of power systems that had been running for decades or centuries. Surfaces that appeared to be metal showed wear patterns consistent with human touch, human use, human habitation. More unsettling still was the fact that artificial gravity was functioning throughout large sections of the vessel. Their boots found solid purchase on deck plating that vibrated almost imperceptibly with the rhythm of machinery that continued to operate despite the ship's apparent abandonment. "Life support systems are active in multiple sections," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with disbelief as he consulted his scanner readings. "I'm detecting breathable atmosphere, temperature regulation systems, and even some kind of air circulation network. This ship is still alive." It was Vasquez who discovered the first definitive proof of the vessel's origins. Etched deep into a bulkhead in letters that were unmistakably human was an inscription that challenged everything they thought they understood about linear time. U.S. Eidolon's wake, commissioned 2904 AD, ad astra, per aspera. The silence that followed her reading was profound, broken only by the subtle hum of machinery and the sound of their own breathing within their helmets. "That's 880 years in the future," Webb finally managed to say, his voice hollow with implications that stretched far beyond the scope of any single scientific discovery. They moved deeper into the vessel, their helmet lights revealing evidence of both extraordinary beauty and incomprehensible catastrophe. This had once been a magnificent ship, elegant curves and soaring architectural spaces that spoke of a human civilization that had achieved artistic heights beyond their current imagination. Gardens had once flourished under artificial suns, their remains now scattered like memories across collapsed deck plating that told stories of lives lived among the stars. But interwoven with the beauty lay evidence of disaster on an unprecedented scale. Entire sections of the ship had been compressed as if by enormous pressure that had exceeded even the advanced materials tolerance limits. Emergency bulkheads had been sealed and then torn open from the inside by forces that had treated reinforced alloys like paper. Throughout the vessel, scattered like leaves in an autumn wind, were personal belongings that spoke of lives interrupted. Children's toys crafted from materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid states. Family photographs that showed faces that were recognizably human, but subtly different in ways that suggested centuries of evolution. Wedding rings and jewelry that incorporated elements not found in Earth's periodic table. The first bodies they encountered were in what appeared to have been an observation lounge, a space with vast windows that now looked out onto the absolute darkness of wherever this vessel had come to rest. Perfectly preserved by the cold vacuum and the ship's advanced preservation systems, the corpses appeared to be merely sleeping. Men, women, and children, wearing clothing that was recognizably human in design but crafted from textiles that seemed to incorporate living fibers, materials that continued to shift and flow subtly, even in death. "Look at their expressions," Webb said softly, his voice filled with wonder and growing unease. "They don't look afraid. They look peaceful, almost transcendent." But as they penetrated deeper towards the vessel's heart, following corridors that seemed to lead them along predetermined paths, the bodies began to tell a different story. In passages that led toward the ship's central sections, they found evidence of panic, people running from something, sealing themselves behind emergency barriers that had ultimately proven insufficient, making desperate attempts to reach escape pods that had apparently never launched. The ship's final records were carved directly into metal bulkheads throughout the vessel, a desperate measure undertaken when electronic systems had failed and the crew had resorted to preserving their story in the most permanent medium available. Hayes read the inscriptions aloud as they walked, her voice echoing in corridors that had heard no human speech for centuries. Final log entry, Chief Science Officer Dr. Amanda Reeves, September 12th, 2904. The Earth died today. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally ceased to support human life. The atmospheric cascade reached the tipping point at 3:47 in the morning GMT. The final monitoring station went silent 6 hours ago. Conservative estimates suggest that 50 billion people died in the final 72 hours. We are all that remains of human civilization. The entries continued along the walls like a timeline of humanity's final chapter, each inscription more desperate than the last. Climate change had accelerated beyond every prediction and computer model. Resource wars had consumed entire continents as the last habitable regions became killing fields for the remaining survivors. The oceans had acidified beyond the point where marine ecosystems could function. The atmosphere itself had become toxic to human life. The few million survivors had poured their species' remaining resources into a single desperate gamble, an ark ship designed to carry 50,000 people to a new world where humanity might begin again. Launch date, March 15th, 2897. Hayes read from another wall. Destination, Kepler, 442b. Estimated journey time, 47 years. Ship's complement, 49,847 human beings, plus genetic material and embryonic storage for another 200,000 potential colonists. But the story didn't end with a successful colonization. 3 years into their interstellar voyage, the colonists had received devastating news from their advanced probe systems. Solar flare activity had sterilized their destination planet decades before their arrival. The new world they'd traveled so far to reach was as dead as the Earth they'd fled. Webb discovered the next chapter carved into laboratory walls. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's breakthrough, temporal displacement through exotic matter manipulation. If we cannot reach another world, perhaps we can reach another time. Rodriguez whistled low. A time machine. They tried to save us, Hayes realized, understanding flooding through her as she read more of the inscriptions. They discovered portal technology and attempted to return to our era, to warn us about what was coming, to help us avoid the catastrophes that destroyed their world. The deeper they traveled, following corridors that seemed to guide their steps, the more evidence they found of the crossing's catastrophic effects. Bodies told different stories here. Not peaceful death, but transformation into something that retained human shape while becoming fundamentally alien. The medical bay provided the most disturbing evidence of these transformations. Hundreds of cryogenic preservation pods lined the walls in precise rows, most dark and silent, their occupants long since expired, but several dozen continued to hum with active power, their inhabitants visible through frosted windows that revealed forms that challenged the boundaries of human anatomy. Hayes approached the nearest active pod with the careful movements of someone who understood that they were confronting something beyond their ability to understand or control. Through the transparent aluminum window, she could see a body that was recognizably human in its basic structure, but wrong in ways that made her mind struggle to process the visual information. The torso had elongated beyond normal human proportions, ribs visible through skin that had become translucent enough to reveal the modified organs beneath. The limbs had extended and thinned, joints bending in directions that violated human anatomy. The face was the most disturbing element, features that were still recognizably human, but stretched and rearranged into expressions that suggested emotions or sensations that human neurology had never evolved to experience. But it was the eyes that made Hayes step backward involuntarily. They were open, aware, and looking directly at her with an intelligence that was vast and utterly inhuman, despite its human origins. "Vital signs are active," Rodriguez confirmed, his scanner painting data across his helmet display. "Whatever that thing is, it's alive, but the biological readings don't match any human parameters in our medical databases." As if responding to their observation, the pod's emergency release system activated without any input from the astronauts. The seal broke with a violent hiss of escaping gas, and the entity within sat upright with movements that were too fluid, too graceful for human anatomy. When it smiled at them, Hayes saw that its teeth had been replaced by formations that resembled crystalline structures, each one pulsing with the same blue light that emanated from the portal they'd used to reach this place. 3 rounds from Rodriguez's weapon. The entity examined the holes in its chest with mild curiosity, then closed its eyes as if merely interrupted from rest. Alarms sang through the ship, not harsh warnings, but something almost melodic. "We need to leave this section immediately," Vasquez said, her hand moving to her own weapon. But even as she spoke, they all realized that the corridor behind them had somehow changed. The walls appeared closer together, the ceiling lower, the overall geometry subtly different from what they remembered traversing just minutes earlier. The ship was herding them, guiding them towards some predetermined destination. The whispers began then, voices filtering through their communication systems like static, gradually resolving into something heartbreakingly familiar. Hayes heard Lily, her 8-year-old daughter back on Earth, asking why Mummy had gone so far away and when she would come home. "I miss you, Mummy. I had bad dreams, and you weren't here to make them go away. Please come back soon." The voice was perfect in every detail. Lily's slight lisp as she worked with her speech therapist, the way she pronounced certain words, with the careful precision of a child who was still learning the complexities of language. But Lily was 40,000 kilometers away, sleeping safely in her bed, while her mother explored the boundaries of human knowledge. Webb had stopped moving entirely, tears streaming down his face inside his helmet as he responded to voices only he could hear. "Dad? Dad, I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you died. I should have visited more often. I should have told you how much you meant to me." Rodriguez had backed against the corridor wall, his weapon trained on shadows that seemed to shift and move independently of their helmet lights. "They're not real," he repeated like a mantra. "They're not real. They can't be real." But the voices were achieving their intended effect. The ship's layout continued to shift around them, corridors leading in directions that defied the mental map they'd constructed of the vessel's architecture. They were being manipulated, guided towards the ship's heart by something that understood human psychology with precision that bordered on the supernatural. The walls themselves began to function as narrative devices, displaying carved reliefs that hadn't been visible during their initial passage through these areas. The artwork depicted the transformation of the Eidolon's wake from a vessel of hope and human achievement into something else entirely. Human figures were shown being absorbed into the ship's structure, their faces displaying expressions of transcendent joy as they became part of something larger than individual existence. The ship isn't just carrying passengers, Hayes realized, understanding flooding through her as she studied the carvings. It has become them, and they have become it. The boundary between crew and vessel has been deliberately dissolved. They found themselves inevitably drawn into a vast central chamber that pulsed with organic rhythms, like standing inside the heart of some enormous organism. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, supported by structures that appeared to be part architectural engineering and part biological growth. Phosphorescent veins ran through the walls, carrying some form of energy or nutrient that painted everything in shifting patterns of blue and green light. But it was the engine at the chamber's center that challenged the fundamental categories of human understanding. 50 meters in diameter, it resembled a massive organ that had been grown rather than built. Part mechanical precision, part biological function, all bewildering by any engineering principles they understood. Its surface was covered in human faces, dozens of faces that pressed against a membrane so thin it seemed translucent. The faces moved in perfect synchronization, their mouths forming words in languages that predated human civilization, their eyes reflecting intelligence that transcended individual identity. Webb had transformed when they weren't watching. His smile stretched beyond human limits. His movements flowed like liquid, and his eyes held depth that mortal minds weren't meant to contain. "The crossing changed us," he said, voice carrying extraordinary harmonics. "We learned that boundaries between self and other are illusions holding species back." Hayes raised her weapon. "What you offered was extinction." "Evolution," Webb replied. 50,000 people, their memories, dreams, love, all preserved, all connected, all eternal. Hayes's hand found the detonator for the mining charges they brought for geological sampling. The explosives had been designed to fracture lunar rock, but they would serve another purpose now. "How long have you been waiting here?" 817 years, 4 months, 12 days, Webb answered with inhuman precision. "We tried crossing immediately, but the portal needed time to stabilize. Now we can bring our gifts to your era." Hayes' finger found the detonator. "Your gifts?" "Help your species evolve beyond individual limitation." His smile widened astonishingly. "Transform you into something magnificent." Hayes triggered the detonator. The explosion was beyond magnificent. A chain reaction that ripped through the ship's fusion containment systems and sent shockwaves through 8 centuries of carefully preserved dreams and hopes. The chamber filled with fire and debris as the vessel's core systems began their final catastrophic failure sequence. But even as shrapnel tore through his transformed body, Webb's voice continued, filled with genuine joy and something that might have been gratitude. "You still don't understand the true beauty of what we've accomplished," he said as his form began to dissipate in the growing conflagration. "We never needed the ship to complete our crossing. The vessel was merely a delivery system, a way to establish the initial connection between your time and ours. All we ever truly needed was one of you to carry us back." Hayes felt something vast and cold sliding through her thoughts like ice water in her veins, and realized with mounting horror that she'd been infected from the moment she'd first stepped aboard the Eidolon's wake. The entity had been patient and subtle, learning the contours of her memories and emotions, studying the architecture of her personality before revealing its presence. But some essential core of her identity, the part that had looked up at the night sky as a child and dreamed of touching the stars, refused to surrender to the invasion. She fought against the alien presence with every technique she'd learned for managing fear and maintaining focus under extreme stress, using her love for Lily and her commitment to humanity's future as weapons against the thing that sought to remake her in its image. The entity recoiled from her resistance, apparently surprised by the strength of her individual will. That moment of surprise provided the opening she needed. Hayes stumbled through collapsing corridors as the ship died around her. emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red, while artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending debris floating in all directions. The portal was flickering unstably when she reached the chamber where their journey had begun, its blue glow pulsing erratically as the ship's power systems failed throughout the vessel. Behind her, she could hear something massive moving through the dying ship, not running or fleeing, but approaching with the patient confidence of a predator that had waited centuries for this moment, and could wait centuries more if necessary. Hayes threw herself through the portal just as the Eidolon's wake's antimatter containment systems reached critical failure. The explosion that followed would have been visible from Earth if there had been anyone left to see it, a brief new star that burned for exactly 17 seconds before fading back into the cosmic darkness. The blast sent Hayes tumbling across the lunar chamber floor, her environmental suit systems screaming warnings about radiation exposure, structural integrity breaches, and the dozen other ways that her protective equipment was failing to keep her alive in an environment that offered no forgiveness for human frailty. Alone now, she dragged herself to the chamber wall and looked up through the shaft they'd carved toward the surface, toward home. Earth hung in the black sky like a blue and white marble, so beautiful and fragile that it made her heart ache with love and loss and desperate hope that she might somehow find a way to protect it. Behind her, the portal's light died as the ship beyond was consumed by nuclear fire, hot enough to convert matter directly to energy. The peculiar archway began to crack along lines that followed mathematical principles her education hadn't prepared her to understand, its alien metal turning to dust that drifted in the moon's weak gravity like the dreams of a dead civilization. But in those final moments, as the last traces of the portal faded into memory, Hayes saw a silhouette standing calmly in the inferno beyond. It raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a farewell, and though no sound could travel through the vacuum of space, she heard Webb's familiar voice whispered directly into her mind, with the intimacy of thought itself. "Don't mourn for us, Victoria. We found exactly what we were looking for. And someday, when your species has matured sufficiently, you will find us again. The circle must close, the garden must be tended, and the harvest." The voice paused, filled with something like paternal affection. "The harvest is always worth the wait." The portal collapsed with a sound like reality ripping, and Hayes was left alone with knowledge that would either save humanity or drive her to madness, with its implications for everything she'd believed about free will and human destiny. She activated her emergency beacon and began the long, painful climb back toward the lunar surface, knowing that when rescue arrived, she would have to find a way to explain the unexplainable. But more critically, she would have to decide whether humanity deserved a warning about what waited in its future, or whether some truths were too dangerous to share with a species that might not be ready to learn that its evolution had been guided from the very beginning. As she climbed through 47 meters of lunar regolith towards safety, Hayes couldn't escape the feeling that she was being observed, not by something behind her in the collapsed chamber, but by intelligence that existed in the spaces between moments, watching from dimensions that intersected with reality at angles human geometry couldn't describe. The climb took her 4 hours. 4 hours of hand-over-hand progression through a shaft that had become her entire universe, fighting against the weakness in her limbs and the growing certainty that she was carrying something back to Earth that shouldn't be allowed to arrive. Her suit's life support systems were failing incrementally, oxygen recycling operating at 60% efficiency, thermal regulation fluctuating between acceptable and dangerous, radiation shielding compromised by debris impact. But she climbed. When she finally emerged onto the lunar surface, Earth's blue glow had never seemed more precious. She collapsed beside their abandoned equipment, looking up at humanity's home world hanging in the star-filled darkness like a promise that life could flourish even in a universe that seemed designed to extinguish it. Her emergency beacon was already transmitting to Artemis Base Station, but the rescue would take time. Time alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that something fundamental about human existence had been revealed to her, something that her species might not be psychologically equipped to handle. She activated her personal log recorder, knowing that what she said in the next few minutes might determine humanity's future. Personal log, Commander Victoria Hayes, Artemis Base 7, Supplemental, Mission Day 23, approximately 6 o'clock evening GMT. Her voice was hoarse with exhaustion and something deeper than fear. I am the sole survivor of what I can only describe as first contact with something that transcends our current understanding of intelligence, evolution, and the nature of existence itself. She paused, staring up at Earth while she tried to find words for the unthinkable. The entity we encountered claims to be humanity's future, our descendants who travel back through time to guide our evolutionary development. They call themselves gardeners, and they suggest that human civilization has been cultivated from its earliest stages according to some cosmic design we are incapable of comprehending. The silence of space surrounded her words, offering no comfort and no judgment. I don't know if what I experienced was truth or elaborate deception. I don't know if the creature that spoke through Dr. Webb was genuinely trying to help our species evolve or preparing to harvest us for purposes I can't imagine. But I know that something is coming. In 800 years, humanity will build the Eidolon's wake and launch it toward the stars, carrying passengers who have been waiting for that moment since before our species learned to use tools. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of knowledge that no single person should have to carry. The temporal mechanics suggest that these events are not just predicted, but predestined. The future creates the past that creates the future in an endless loop. If I'm right about what I witnessed, then every choice humanity has ever made, every technological breakthrough, every cultural evolution, has been subtly guided by intelligence from our own future. Her emergency beacon chirped, indicating that rescue vessels had achieved orbital insertion around the moon. Help was coming, but Hayes wondered if rescue was what she actually needed. The question becomes, what do I do with this information? Do I tell the world that free will might be an illusion, that our entire species has been carefully cultivated by entities that wear human faces but serve purposes we can't understand? Do I warn Earth about the harvest that may be coming? Or do I accept that some knowledge is too dangerous for our current level of spiritual and psychological development? The first lights of the rescue craft appeared as stars that moved against the cosmic background with purposeful direction. Soon she would be surrounded by medical technicians, debriefing specialists, and administrators who would want detailed explanations for what had happened to her team. I've made my decision, she said into the recorder. Humanity deserves to know what I've learned, but not yet. Not until we've had time to develop the philosophical and emotional tools necessary to process information of this magnitude. For now, I'll report that we encountered evidence of advanced technology and that my team was lost in an accident during our investigation. The rescue craft's landing thrusters kicked lunar dust into ballistic trajectories as precise as clockwork. But I will not let this knowledge die with me. I'm establishing a sealed archive that will be opened automatically in 50 years, when our species may be better equipped to handle the truth. And I will dedicate the remainder of my career to preparing humanity for what may be coming, strengthening our technological capabilities, our philosophical frameworks, and our ability to face cosmic truths that challenge everything we believe about our place in the universe. The rescue team was unpacking medical equipment and moving toward a position with the careful efficiency of people trained to save lives in hostile environments. Final note, Hayes said, her voice barely a whisper. I can feel it sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep. Something vast and patient, watching from the spaces between thoughts. The entity that spoke through Webb may be gone, but I don't think it was the only one. I think they're all around us, have always been around us, waiting for humanity to mature enough to accept their guidance. She switched off the recorder as the medical team reached her position. "Commander Hayes," the team leader said, his voice warm with relief and professional concern. "We're going to get you home." Home. The word carried weight it had never possessed before. Home to Earth, where 8 billion people lived their lives without knowing that their every choice might be part of a pattern designed by intelligence from a future that had already been written. "Thank you," she replied, allowing them to help her towards the rescue craft. "It's good to see human faces again." But even as she said it, Hayes wondered if she would ever again be able to look at another person without questioning whether she was seeing an individual consciousness, making free choices, or a component in some vast biological machine designed by gardeners who had been tending their crop for millennia. The flight back to Artemis Space Station passed in a blur of medical attention and preliminary debriefings. Hayes stuck to her cover story: equipment failure, structural collapse, the loss of her team in circumstances beyond anyone's control. The investigators were thorough but sympathetic, accepting her account while noting inconsistencies they attributed to trauma and survivor's guilt. 3 days later, she was back on Earth, walking through forests that smelled of life and possibility, breathing air that carried the songs of birds who built their nests according to genetic programs millions of years in the making. Everything looked exactly as she remembered it, but now she saw it through eyes that had glimpsed the clockwork behind the chaos. Lily ran to her with the pure joy of a child whose mother had returned from unthinkable distances. Hayes lifted her daughter and held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the strong beat of her heart against her chest. This was real. This was worth protecting. Whatever the entities from humanity's future intended, whatever harvest they were preparing, this moment of pure love was worth defending against any force in the universe. "Did you find anything exciting on the moon, Mommy?" Lily asked, with the innocent curiosity that made childhood so precious. Hayes smiled, thinking of blue light and bewildering geometries and voices that spoke from beyond the boundaries of linear time. "Just rocks and dust, sweetheart. Just rocks and dust." But late at night, when Lily was sleeping safely in her bed, and the house was quiet except for the subtle sounds of human civilization continuing its ancient work, Hayes would stand at her window and look up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in dimensions that intersected with reality at angles her mind couldn't visualize, she knew that vast intelligences were watching humanity's development with the patience of gardeners who had all the time in the universe to tend their crops. The harvest was coming. Maybe not in her lifetime, maybe not in Lily's, but coming nonetheless. And when it arrived, humanity would discover whether they had been cultivated as partners in some cosmic endeavor or as resources to be consumed by intelligence that had transcended the limitations of individual existence. Until then, Hayes would do what humans had always done: love their children, build their civilizations, reach for the stars, and hope that when the moment of truth finally arrived, they would prove worthy of whatever destiny the universe had prepared for them. In her sealed archive, locked away until humanity might be ready for its contents, her true report waited like a seed, planted in fertile soil, ready to bloom when the time was right. The circle was closing, the garden was nearly ready, and somewhere in the quantum foam that underlies all reality, the gardeners smiled with faces that had once been human and continued their patient work of cultivation that spanned centuries and redefined the very meaning of what it means to be alive. The future was coming home, and Earth would never be the same. Years passed. Hayes rose through NASA's ranks, becoming administrator, then director of the newly formed Office of Cosmic Preparedness. She never spoke publicly about what she'd found beneath Shackleton crater, but her policies reflected a deep understanding of humanity's place in a universe far stranger than most people imagined. She funded research into exotic physics, consciousness studies, and what she termed existential resilience, humanity's ability to maintain its identity when confronted with truths that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality. She established protocols for first contact scenarios that went far beyond simple alien visitation, preparing for encounters with intelligences that might not recognize the boundaries between individual and collective existence. Lily grew up to become a physicist herself, drawn to her mother's work without understanding its true origins. She specialized in temporal mechanics and dimensional theory, making breakthrough discoveries that Hayes recognized as steps along the path her daughter was always meant to walk. The archive remained sealed, its contents waiting for a future generation that might be better equipped to process the implications of what Hayes had learned. But sometimes, in moments of quiet reflection, she wondered if that future would ever arrive, or if humanity was destined to remain children playing in a garden tended by intelligences they couldn't comprehend, until the day the gardeners decided it was time for harvest. The stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to human hopes and fears. But in the spaces between the light, something vast and patient watched the small blue world where 8 billion souls lived and loved and dreamed, unaware that their dreams had been carefully cultivated for purposes beyond their understanding. The circle was closing. The garden was ready. And in the deepest chambers of her heart, Victoria Hayes knew that someday, perhaps sooner than anyone imagined, humanity would discover whether it had been grown as fruit to be plucked or as seeds to be planted among the stars.